if somebody's listening to the first time, like, what do you want about this Austrian economics? I've never been to Austria. What the hell is this all about?
Well, in the late 1800s, 1900s, a couple of really smart people were in Austria, in Vienna. And there was a big, somewhat divide across multiple disciplines, roughly saying between collectivism and individualism, so to say, right? So there was, in terms of psychology, right? There was a camp that was about the collective psyche and like the zeitgeist, etc. And then there was Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud, who focused on the psyche of the individual. Right? And that was a huge clash in Vienna that happened between these two ideas of how to think about psychology. Simultaneously, the same battle was happening in economics, right? About collectivist economics. Things like Marx, for example, and communism came out of that idea, as well then the individualistic individualistically focused economics, which is basically what we now know as the Austrian School of Economics or praxeology, where we analyze the consequences of human action. And we can deduce things like what happens when we increase the money supply? What happens when we put a maximum limit on the wages or a minimum price for certain goods? What are the consequences of this economically speaking?
See, you would have thought if you were making economic decisions for a country of 70 million people that this would be something you would just naturally do. Like you should just be studying the consequences of these decisions.
Yeah.
But there's no incentive to do it. Because the answers you come to would be that this is fucking nonsense. What are we doing here?
Yeah, basically.
So why do you think Austrian economics hasn't really become a mainstream school of economics? I mean, it is, I think that's an unfair thing to say. It is a mainstream school. I'm aware, there's a lot of people aware of it. But why isn't this a standard of economics that has really been understood outside of kind of these niche circles of maybe gold bugs or Bitcoiners or libertarians?
Mm-hmm.
Because it shouldn't be seen as radical, right?
No, it's pretty common sense, to be honest. I mean, it's not common, unfortunately, but it
is
should
common
be.
sense.
Yeah. Well, it's a really good question. And I think to some extent it was just about like academia and people being tossed out of their positions if they, were thinking about, along these lines. Like there were a lot of people that, or universities that when you would put some Austrian economics into your curriculum, you would just not get the job next year, basically.
Why though?
It's a good question. I think a lot of the current academia is there kind of to defend the status quo, to defend what is there. Like there was again in Vienna there was the House of Hohenzollern, rich, extremely wealthy, like near royalty family for many long time in Europe, and they had a group of academics that they called the intellectual bodyguard of the House of Hohenzollern, right? So they really wanted to make sure that their like prime position as being close to the center of power will be defended on an ideological basis. Right? That people think it's not just okay, but it's actually desirable to have people at central points of control in the economy.
So, do you think now you've been around Bitcoin for quite a bit of time now? Is there an absolute natural fit between Bitcoin and Austrian economics, or is there any misalignment?
No, I think it's spot on.
It's perfect.
Satoshi is like the greatest living applied, or I'm not sure if he's living, but the greatest applied economist. No, because like he obviously and very deeply understood the Austrian reasoning from all of his writings and the importance of the fixed money supply, the importance of individual verification of the rules. Right? All of this is deeply, deeply, deeply Austrian, and I think that was. Almost, not all, but a lot of the cypherpunks were very much influenced by the likes of Murray Rothbard and others. So there is definitely a strong correlation here. And like, for example, Hal Finney, one of his early comments was about Bitcoin banks, and the aspect of fractional reserves, etc., with Bitcoin banks. That's like the one of the root causes of debates in Austrian economics is banking and fractional reserve, etc. So it was definitely at the forefront, or in the minds of the people working on Bitcoin very, very early.
So what is that rooted debate with regards to the banks and fractional reserve? What, there's a disagreement whether it can or can't work, should work, what's the basis of the arguments?
So it kind of depends a lot on what we're actually talking about. For example, there is this concept of a money warehouse. It's the very basics of a bank, so to say. Right? I have a gold coin, give that gold coin to you because you have a big metal box where you can lock it in and a big guy with a gun in front of it to defend it. Now I'm hiring you as my money warehouse. You store my money, and in exchange, you give me this little paper certificate that says, hey, Max owns one gold coin in my vault, for example. And so this could be written on my name specifically, right? That only I can come to you to get back that gold coin. Or it can be whoever has this piece of paper has the right to get that one gold coin back. Right? So I can take this piece of paper, give it to someone else, and then that person comes to you and you will give him the gold back.
Because the note is a promise.
Exactly.
Right.
The note is basically a promise to withdrawal or a demand deposit, it's often called. But of course, the physical piece of paper is not the same thing as the physical piece of gold.
Of course.
Right? So the question is, what's the price difference between the gold and the paper? Right? If you're a extremely reputable money warehouse with highest security standards and lots of ethics, and you're never going to steal from anyone, then there's a high chance that the paper and the gold coin trade at par. Meaning that whenever I say I want to get a gram of gold, and someone gives me a gram of gold promised from your money warehouse, I'll be happy, right? And I won't charge anything extra just because it's the piece of paper. But so then, what happens if, let's say, you have 100 grams of gold in your vault, but you issue, instead of 100 paper certificates, 200? Right? Now, all of a sudden, there's 200 claims on the gold out there, but there's only 100 pieces of gold.
And who would know?
And who would know? Exactly. Because very often, sure, maybe, once a day someone comes and picks up a gram of gold, but almost never does someone come and pick up 100 grams of gold, right? Everything.
Yeah.
So if you just hand out more paper receipts, sure, maybe someone, then every day 2 grams of gold gets withdrawn, let's say, but that's still not 100. So you can fractional reserve, so to say, without it being noticed.
I gotta read a quote. This is Danny read this to me this morning. You got to talk to me about Jörg Guido Hülsmann.
Jörg Guido Hülsmann.
Oh, I got close. Jörg Guido Hülsmann.
Sehr gut.
Is that a German name?
He's German.
He's German.
German, and I think his wife is French, and he's living in France.
Ich heiße Jörg Guido Hülsmann.
Sehr gut.
All right, okay. So he wrote The Ethics of Money Production. I've
Beautiful
actually
book.
never read it.
So good.
I've got it at home. I've just never got round to it.
So good. And the crazy thing is, he published that in 2007, which I think is definitive proof that Hülsmann is in fact Satoshi.
That's what I said to Daddy this morning. I was like, is this guy Satoshi? All right, listen, I'm going to read this. I'm going to read this quote. Okay. An economic good that is defined entirely in terms of bits and bytes is unlikely ever to be produced spontaneously on a free market. And despite the dedicated efforts of various individuals and associations, no such money has in fact ever been produced since the creation of the internet made electronic payments possible. At present, only government money has been produced in electronic form. These new electronic techniques of dealing with money are very efficient and beneficial, but they must not be confused with the creation of electronic money. So let's just say that first again. An economic good that is defined entirely in terms of bits and bytes. So, I mean, it's a fascinating thing for him to say. And the fact that he wrote this, the book came out in 2008.
And he was right?
He was
at that
absolutely right. Was he at all wrapped up in the kind of cypherpunk scene or anything like that?
I don't think so, to be honest.
No?
No, he was definitely very much involved in the Austrian rabbit hole, for sure. Okay. And yes, there was some overlap, but if he ever read the cypherpunk mailing list or wrote there, I'm not sure. Would be interesting to check if he ever got quoted on the cypherpunk mailing list. That would be quite interesting.
But you've met him, right? You've orange pilled him.
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, he was orange pilled before I met him.
Oh, was he?
Yeah, that's just yet another sign that he's in fact Satoshi.
Okay. So in terms of this, when he talks about an economic good that is defined entirely of bits and bytes.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's an economic good? That's the first question.
Well, yes. Okay.
So an economic good is a scarce and rivalrous resource. Okay, so what does scarce mean? Scarce means there's a potential of conflict over who can utilize this resource. Right? So, that piece of paper in front of me, either you hold it or I hold it. There's no way that we could both at the same time hold and use the same piece of paper for different reasons, right? Or for different uses. That just doesn't work. This unit is scarce. Either you use it or I use it, right? Then the other thing is, how much, is it super abundant? Is there a lot of it? Think of it like the air in this room, right? There's a lot of it here. However, air is still a scarce resource. And you realize that when you go underwater and you have a bottle of pressurized air with you, either I breathe it or you. If there's not enough air molecules in this bottle for both of us, then we have a conflict over who can use the scarce resource that is limited in quantity, where the supply that we have is less or not enough to satisfy all of the needs that we have. Right? So we can have super abundant scarce resources like air in this case, but ultimately it's still scarce. Then the next part, what are bits and bytes? Right? Bits and bytes isn't numbers, right? Ones and zeros. It's information. Information is not scarce fundamentally. Right? If I say the word zero, that doesn't hinder you from using the word zero or the number zero in your math. Right? It's when we can share information, we can copy it. And I can't copy this piece of paper, but I can copy the words that are on top of it. And that is a big, big, big fundamental difference, because this means now, regardless of how much the demand is for this piece of knowledge, well, I can copy it and satisfy any demand ad infinitum. Right? So that means that information is not scarce, and therefore it cannot be rivalrous, and therefore it is not an economic good.
Okay.
Right? And so what he's basically saying is that a money has to be scarce. A money has to be rivalrous. A single coin of money must only be used by one person at one time for one task. Right? You cannot use the same gold coin and pay two different people with it.
Nope.
You know how Satoshi called this? The double spending problem.
Double spend problem. Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly what Hillebrand is saying here. The double spending problem has not been solved unless we add or we introduce the government. Right? Because what we can say is, okay, over here's the government, and that government says which transaction came first, basically. And that central party that we all trust and that has full control and that we cannot verify, right? They say, okay, this is the real coin and this copy of the coin is fake, so to say. Which, of course sucks, because now we have to trust this third party with doing this. And what Satoshi found out is that we can, in fact, use software and speech in order to establish, or in order to solve the double spending problem, to establish scarcity, rivalrousness in cyberspace without relying on a single trusted third party. Right? Every one of us can create new units of Bitcoin. It's not just limited to the government, that only they can create new units of money, which is what they do with digital fiat currencies, right? But with Bitcoin, everyone can do it, right? Because we all have a system of rules that we define, verify, and enforce on our individual computers as Bitcoin full nodes. And so every full node is the issuer, so to say, of the rules and the monetary tokens. Right? And we have a clear set of rules on who gets to spend the token first. The miners, those who find the block, and then whoever is at the tip of the chain of signatures that transfer the coins to the next person.